Oh, there you are. Welcome back. Coming to you live today from beautiful downtown Grand Rapids. Thought I'd bring this one closer back to home. What we're going to talk about today is the content for the second week of our class. This is going to talk about topics and sources, as well as differences between informative and persuasive speaking. And those are together because your topics and your sources may be the same for both informative and persuasive speaking, but the way that you use them will likely change at least a little. So, let's go ahead and talk about what you'll need in terms of topic and source, and then we'll explain that a little more. Also, on this video, I will show you what I'm looking for in terms of your worksheet for these two things that has a due date coming up there on the syllabus. So over here, we've got our topics for this class. Now, as you learned last time, this class has a theme, and the theme centers on thinking nationally and acting practically. And so, again, that is something that it's an issue that's affecting us as a nation or a world or some large scale way. But it's also something that we can maybe solve locally or at least address locally, meaning us in the class, in order to see real change. So, beyond that, there are a few other things that you should consider as a checklist when you're picking your topic. First one is make sure it's appropriate. So, what I mean there is don't embarrass yourself or others. Um, I've seen a couple examples of this. So, sometimes people will take very hardline issues on sensitive topics. So I'll just tell you, I had a guy in class once who informed us that in the past he had been addicted to masturbation. He gave his speech on how dangerous that is. Now, for him, he didn't seem embarrassed by it. But I can say that it made the class uncomfortable. And so for me, looking back, that would have been branded an inappropriate topic, at least for this audience, right? I mean, we're all adults, sure, but that's a tough one. You also don't want to embarrass other people. If you're going to talk about things like abortion, first of all, that's just tired, and I don't really want you to do that. But I've had people do it before and then ask questions like, raise your hand if you've ever had an abortion. You really, really, no, that's not going to work. So again, it has to be controversial, right? And that just means that there are two or more sides. And this can be simple things. I might get to this later, but we'll hit it now. This could be like Mac versus PC. So again, that's not controversial in the sense of, is it risque? But it's controversial in the sense that it comes down on one of two sides. You either prefer Macs or you prefer PCs. Or maybe there's a third one I don't know about, Linux. So again, controversial is necessary, but also appropriate matters. That's that next item there with controversy. It could be something large and controversial. How do we handle immigration, gun control? What are we going to do with climate change? What I don't want you to do with climate change, for example, is climate change real? Yeah, it is. So that's not controversial anymore. You might argue why it's changing, or you may argue what we can do to change it between a couple different options. That's controversial, but does it exist? Not so much. The topic should also be timely. So it needs to be something that is important to the audience either right now or in the very near future. Some things that don't fit that. I've had folks talk about requiring certain things in high schools. No, not really. We've all finished high school. And the argument can be made, well, if you have kids someday. No, because what if we don't? What if the person doesn't want kids? Or maybe if they're going into education, but this isn't an all education majors course. So those sorts of things that they don't really work that well. Pick something that's either important right now or will be in the very near future. That relates back to the next item. Make sure your topic is relevant. So the topic should matter in the lives of the audience. So something that's timely right now that may not really affect us right away would be like, Social Security when people retire. I'm still 30 years away from that, so God knows you are. That's one of those things that could be controversial. It wouldn't be embarrassing necessarily. It's timely in the sense that it's under attack, in a way, but it's not relevant to this audience. So get rid of those topics, weed those out. And then last but not least, make sure that you're passionate about your topic. You should really care about your topic. First, because you're going to use that topic for the rest of the semester. And if it's something that you're not really passionate about, it's going to make the semester, even though it's short, feel much longer because it's what you're going to work with time after time after time. So make sure that you can do that. Also, when you care about something, it often shows when you give a presentation. You've seen people give talks on things that they really could care less about, maybe in a group presentation or another class, and that shows through as well. They seem disinterested. Even if they try to fake it, it's never quite the real thing. And so if you pick something that you're passionate about, we see as the audience that you care about your topic. Therefore, we're more likely to care about your topic also. Okay, so those are some general checklists, but now what about a process to get you to that point? What I'll say, first of all, is if you're having trouble deciding on a topic, you can go to the speech lab to get assistance with that. One of the things we do is brainstorming. I know many people think, well, it's not that hard to do on your own. Well, sometimes you just need somebody to bounce ideas off of. And if your roommate is, gone for the summer or is tired of it, you can always come and use us. So when you think about how to brainstorm, make a list of possible topics. There's a couple different ways you can do this, but make your list and then turn that into, apply the checklist above to that. And then you can really get into your brainstorming for each one of those individual topics. So for example, some folks like linear brainstorming. That is sort of when you make like a nice outline of what comes to mind and you structure it. That one to me is a little tough to do in brainstorming because it's not fast enough. I prefer to do what I call spatial brainstorming or concept mapping. And this is, I wish I had a whiteboard. That would be very, very handy. Hang on just a second. Let me see. Dun, 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 dun. This is the one time I wish I had Microsoft Paint. Okay, let's do this. Hold on. Dun, 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 dun. We'll come here. Let's do. What I'm going to do is go into my Gmail through the school, and then I'm going to come down to the bottom and go to this thing called Jamboard. It's the closest thing I can find to a whiteboard that's easy to access. So go down here and do a new one. Let this come up. And we'll do something like this. So let's say, oops, a little lag. I had a circle and I wanted to think about one topic that came to mind for me might be, gosh, I don't know. Let's say drugs. This is not easy to work with. So I'm not going to write everything out. Drugs. But what I would do here then is give myself a time limit. So maybe it's 1 minute. And I would put down everything that came to mind for me. about drugs. So I'm going to do something like this. Types, save. I get that over there. Thank you. I'm going to do laws. Great. I'm going to do addiction. Comes to mind for me. Family issues. Also, things like freedom, medicines, music. Lots of drug connections there. Let's do. Well, that'll do for now. And ideally, if I was writing all this, I would just put, sort of a line out from drugs, and then these would be placed around. Then what I would do is look at each one of these, and then brainstorm it again and see where I go. So I'll just do one since we don't have space and timing. Let's do freedom. So with this one, can I? No. Okay, let's just do. Let's do pink notes. That way it stays separate. When I think freedom, I think we should have choice. Save. Rights. Where do they begin and where do they end for people? Safety. The body. Age. So let's say that those were my freedom related. So I'm just going to bring them here. Keep an eye on all of them. Now with this one, what I can find is I've probably got some connections here. So when I thought freedom, I thought we should have choices to do what we want to a degree. Where do your rights begin and where do mine end? So what that really had me thinking of was safety. So if you want to do drugs, great, but when does it become a problem for society and not just you? Should there be an age for that? What are the effects on the body? Then I can look at things like age. Okay, that's going to go also with law. The body, that could go with addiction. Rights can go with the law. Choice and freedom can go together. Safety is sort of, you could put it with medicine, you could put it with freedom. It's kind of everywhere. And so the long story short here is that if you do something like this, it can just help you see all the different thoughts you have about a particular topic. And you might find that your overall topic stays fairly broad, like drugs. You want to talk about drug use in America. And then maybe your persuasive is we need to legalize all drugs in America. Or, not. But let's say that's what we had. Well, that's fine. That would work for this course. But what you also might find is that you're actually much more interested in, it looks like law has the most, right? So there's 2 there. We said we can put this there. So what if we just looked at these and we need 3 main points? Well, okay. So there has to be some law about drugs, even if we legalize everything, alcohol is legal, but we still can't drink and drive. So that would be part of safety. Alcohol is also legal, just like marijuana in Michigan, but you still have to be of a certain age to partake legally. And then you've got to think about, okay, what about rights? Where do those begin and end, for the individual versus the larger group? And so you might then make your whole speech about why we need to change, either strengthen or, rebuild laws as they relate to drug use or anything that comes to mind. So again, that takes you in a new direction. Any of these you could have really gone with music and talked about the influence drugs have in music. And you could have done something like EDM, Woodstock, and like rap. and focused in on one of those, and now your speech is about how music should or should not be censored. These sorts of things. Putting your thoughts on a piece of paper in a logical way like this can help you see things that you otherwise would not. That's the point that I wanted to make there. Okay. So think about doing some of this, and then the last thing there is, once you pick something, commit to it. That's going to be your topic, and don't do the topic and source exercise, that assignment, and then change your mind. Give this plenty of thought beforehand so that you don't have to get yourself in a bind. Okay, that's really what I want to say about topics. It's very wide open as long as it meets these criteria, and this is a way to sort of get new ideas. Now, we'll switch gears over to sources. Very, very important. I just wrapped up a class, obviously, and the number one issue for losing points during a speech was citing sources either incorrectly or bad sources, that kind of thing. So let's talk about sources. First of all, we need to know the difference between a primary source and a secondary source, because I want you to use primary sources. And throughout life, if you can use a primary source, do. Secondary sources can be fine, but they're not the original research, the original document, and that's what we want. These things are preferred. Examples are like academic journals, industry publications, many government agencies. Secondary is usually a report about a report. So that would be if the news talks about a new study from Johns Hopkins says that blah, blah, blah. You don't really want to cite the news. You want to find the primary. Now, these can be acceptable, especially if you're using parts of the actual report of the report. But if you can, go ahead and get deeper. So when you hear things like the New York Times conducted a research project, they probably didn't. Time Magazine did research on this thing. They probably didn't. Now, journalists do research things for sure, but they usually find the primary sources, and then they include those in their story, and they'll tell you what those primary sources were, assuming they aren't confidential. That's what you also need to do. Let's look at a couple examples of this. So, go this way. First of all, when you're looking for sources, a lot of folks will try to get super smart and say things like, well, you should start with a database. We'll get there, but start with Google. So let's do, oh gosh, I don't want to do, you know what, I'll do COVID. That way I know no one else is doing it. So COVID-19 deaths, or actually here, I want to look at this. COVID toes. I don't know if you've seen this, but this is apparently a symptom for some folks. If you get COVID-19, you can get COVID toes. So we see some different options here. I'm not going to look at this one because that's a video. Let's go to Forbes here. Hi, Judy. She's our author. First thing you'll want to make sure you can find is a date that this was published. That's very important. We'll get there. It's good to know the author. It's not necessary to cite them all the time, but it's good to know they're there. So, a few weeks ago, the peculiar symptom of a loss of smell and taste was reported as an early symptom of infection. In one report from Italy, 20% had a skin rash. Let's click on this hyperlink. Oh, it's Judy again. Wow, Judy. You're busy. Let's see. Providers were infected. European Union has failed to support this. I'm trying to see if there was a link to the actual study that found this, although that may not be the way it came out. So let's just jump back and do this one. Where does this take us? Consult QD from the Cleveland Clinic. Cleveland Clinic is a medical organization, obviously. That's going to be much stronger than a Forbes piece. Nothing wrong with Forbes. It's fine as a source. But then if you look here, early reports of skin symptoms, an early report from dermatologists working with COVID-19. Let's click on the report. Aha! Now we've come to the primary source. If you look at this one, you'll see that this is from the Journal of European Academic Dermatological something or another. I'm sure there's a long term for that. Yeah, let's do this. Copy. Let's open up. I want to just find out what the name of this is because that'll be very important. Oh, I just got that. Okay. Journal EUR Dermatol. Yep, that's the one. Journal of the European Academy of Dermatology and Venerology. Sure. Now, that's important because we need to know what journal this came from. We'll get to that in a minute more with citing sources in a certain way, so I'll leave this up. But we definitely want to get to that primary source. And that's what we were able to do just by tracking back a few steps. Most news articles will have these hyperlinks in them. And my advice to you is always, in everything, work smart, not hard, or at least not harder than you have to. So if you're looking for something that's primary and you're not finding it because the news source that you pulled up doesn't have hyperlinks, well, stop spinning your wheels. Go find another news source that does have hyperlinks and use that. All right. So that's what I mean between primary, secondary. Always go primary. Now, here are some types of sources that you can use. In fact, some you have to, like an academic peer-reviewed journal article. Before we look at those, I just want to explain why this class and most others require these. So if you're not familiar with the peer review process, the peer review process makes these sorts of sources the most reliable. So in a nutshell, the peer review process is like this. I decide, okay, I want to do a study on this topic. I do my study, and then I submit it to a conference of people who study that or similar things. If I get accepted, I go to the conference and I present my paper. While I'm there, I get feedback from people who, again, study this stuff. I then take that feedback and I incorporate it somehow or not into my paper. I then send my paper to a journal that I've identified that would be fitting for my work. The journal editor gets a copy of it that I send in, and she or he sends it out to a few reviewers. Usually there's at least 3. Those reviewers are experts in the field, and they read your work and they evaluate it, and they'll rip it up. I mean, they'll tell you what you did wrong, what you do, a little bit of what you did well, and that's their job, is to be very, very critical, and they do a good job at their job. Then they'll send it back to the editor, and they'll have one of 3 things that they can suggest. One is publish right away. That's very rare. They'll have revise, resubmit, which means fix it, use our feedback, and then try again, or deny. So let's say you get a revise, resubmit, which is the most common. That comes back in. Now you take all that feedback from those reviewers and you incorporate that into the paper. And that's going to help you eliminate a lot of the pitfalls or things that might have been stated slightly wrong, or help you state things in a clearer way. Then you submit it again. It goes through the same process. Often it comes back one more time. You have to fix it and send it back. Sometimes you're ready to go. But this is something that allows you to have faith that what you're reading is probably accurate. Now, that also makes necessary the ability to read these sorts of articles and to understand the methodologies and that sort of thing. We're not going to get into that for this class, but just keep that in mind, that even these aren't foolproof, and they can be forged. I mean, there's a study, in the 90s, I guess, that was, I should know his name. I think it's Andrew Whitfield or something, Andrew Wakefield. He published a study that said vaccines cause autism. You may be familiar with that. all the strife that goes on right now and the garbage that you hear, the bad science, came from that article. It stood as truth for, years. And then somebody decided, oh, I'm going to replicate this. I'm going to study it and see what happens when I do it. They got a different result. So they did it again and again and again, and they got different results. And so they went to Andrew Wakefield and said, hey, can we see your stuff? And long story short, he said that he forged it. He wanted an exciting finding so that he could get tenure. Well, he got it, and then he had it taken away along with his PhD, along with his right to teach. I mean, it's a big deal. So those are usually pretty solid. Now, you can find these on Google Scholar. You can use the GVSU database, or sometimes, just like we did, you can find them by following the citations, following those links, and get it right there. I guess that's not exactly where we went, but it was this one. And here we've got the abstract. Now, we don't have the full article, but it's a Wiley publisher, and that tells me that we may have it at Grand Valley. So let's look and find out. I'm just going to copy this so we can take it with us. gvsu.edu/library. And I'm just going to pop it in here, see what we get. What do you know? There it is. Full text online. While this is loading, I'd let you know, use these databases. These databases are very expensive. If you got one of these, sorry, I can't do two things at once. If you got one of these as a private individual and wanted to subscribe to it for a year, I mean, we're talking thousands of dollars. But here, since we get a group rate and it's part of your tuition, you can do it in a different way. So again, we see it there. It's been accepted for publication, undergone full peer review, has not been through copy editing. So it's just letting you know, hey, if you see a typo, it doesn't mean that this is junk. It means that it hasn't gone through that full process. If you like PDFs, you can open it as a PDF. That way you can search for things and all that. And there you go. And so you'll be able to go through and see what's there. Okay. Close that out. So Google Scholar is another one. I know you know about that, so I'm not going to get into that one. What I do want to do is take you back to the library's front page. And as we just did, if you have something like we did, we could just pop it in there. This initial find it bar is fine. It's useful. However, if you want to get a little more specific, I recommend that you do. You can do it a couple different ways. You can go to the databases and look for a database that you think is going to be best. I prefer academic search. I think it's Ultimate now. Yeah, right there. That will give you pretty much what you need. Now, what if you forget that because you don't do this all the time like I do? Here's an easier, well, I guess a simplified way. Go to subject guides and then pick your class. So we were in Com 201, so we'll come to communications and we'll find speech. Then here, by the way, if you need specific assistance, I'm happy to help, but you can also contact Kim Ranger. Not only is she a good person, she's a good librarian and will be happy to help you. But over here, if I go to articles and databases, this will, and Kim put a lot of work into this, show you which ones are the most useful in general, the most used in general for your discipline. So there's my academic search ultimate. So now, if I wanted to find something about COVID toes, let's see what we've got. I don't know if anything has been written on it yet, besides the maybe one thing that we found. COVID-19 Health Organization. Okay, maybe not. Let's work this thing out here. COVID-19. And you've got options here. This isn't just like Google where you want to type it all in. So I'm going to go COVID-19 and United States. And I'm going to drop it down and say not Europe. And let's see what we get. 2,416 hits. That's actually not that bad, but we're going to get it even smaller. Come here. You'll see that you've got options here. Full text, I would click that because that is making sure that you're going to be able to read it when you find it. That didn't take us down below 2,000, but it still took some away. Scholarly, peer-reviewed journals, and you know that's a requirement, so why not check that? That brought us down to 161. The others were mostly newspaper, magazines kind of thing. Publication dates 2020 to 2020 because, that's where we are right now. So now I've narrowed it down between using these two checkboxes. The publication date is activated, and I've given it a fairly specific search. We've got 161 articles. Now let's just even be a little clearer still and say we want to do. Can I move this up? I don't think I can. That's okay. Let's do and treatment. Now we're down to 86. What if we want specifically to look at natural treatments? Now we're down to 30. Do you see what I'm saying here? You can keep going and going and going and going and going. Now, instead of having to look through 2,000 articles, because I know you were going to do that anyway, you can look through 30. That's it. And that makes it much, much more manageable. Then you don't need to read every one of them. I mean, you can tell from the top if this is going to be possibly something that's useful or not. And then whatever you're looking for, give it a scan. If you find something that you might like, so this one, for example, I might not use because it's in Spanish and, well, I don't speak Spanish. It could be translated, but I'll just skip through. What if I see this one, though, and I say, oh, wow, that one looks like something that I might be able to use? Well, I can just click it. I can read the abstract here. This will give me a snapshot of what's going on and let me know, again, should I use it or not. If I decide I should, all I need to do is come over here and click add to folder. And that's all you have to do. And you'll see up here that you instantly have a folder and this is in it. And whatever you put in there will continue to grow. So you might put in 5 or 6 and then really go through those 5 or 6 and not read every word in the article, but scan through and get that idea of what would be most useful. Maybe they're all useful. Cite them all. Hell, that's fine. So the idea there is you'll need academic peer-reviewed sources. And the thing that I would say that is so important, as I mentioned, that people lose points on, is that the oral citation of these things is clear. This is what you want. This is all I need. The journal name and the date of publication. That's it. Not the date you retrieved it. I don't need the database, the search engine, the publisher. Let's go back over for a quick second. So, for example, on this one, if you scan through, you'll see Academic Search Ultimate here. That's what we use to find it. You'll see EBSCO resources. You'll see Michigan e-library down there. And so, whoops, sorry. Pardon me, madam. What I've heard people in the past do is to say something like, according to an article from Polizzi, Lynn, and Perry, who are these people? The only time you'd want to cite somebody's name as an author is if they are well known. So if Dr. Fauci, did an article, you'd want to cite him. Or if this came from Einstein or Bill Gates or whoever, if it's a household name, use it. Otherwise, it's not that useful. And I say that as someone who's published a few things. And I hate to think that people aren't using my name, but it's just the way things work. I've also seen this where people will come down and say, according to a 2020 article found on EBSCO e-resources or found on the Michigan e-library. No, that's not it. And here, look, it tells you the source. It's what it calls it, source. Bam. That's the line that you need. You don't even need all this necessarily. According to a 2020 article published in Clinical Neuropsychiatry, ooh, here's what I found. That's it. That's all you need. So get that clear, and then hopefully that'll make life easier. As far as evaluating these, you really don't need to worry about it as long as they're current, especially if you use statistics. And you say, right now I think something is like 1 in 4 college students has an STD. That's current rates, maybe even 1 in 3 now. Who is it? But if you say that 1 in 10 college students have an STD, and that's according to a journal of college health. Well, yeah, but if that's from 1991, it's useless to us now. Now, there could be old articles that are useful because, one, they can show how things used to be, and then you talk about how they change. Or two, it could be sort of the original work that you want to go back and just reference. Do know that newspapers and magazines are not peer-reviewed, even if they say the word journal. That's sort of your giveaway that it is peer-reviewed, but if it's the Wall Street Journal, for example, it's not. And if you're not sure, Google that journal name and put in peer-reviewed and see what you find. Okay, so those are your academic peer-reviewed journal sources. Next up, news sources. With this one, it's important that you favor easily recognizable news sources. Now, that doesn't mean that's all you can use. But if it's well known, your credibility isn't questioned generally. We'll talk more about that in a second. But it sits better with your audience. If it's not something common, if it's more obscure, give us a very keyword brief description of what it is. So, for example, I have had a student once giving a speech on why we need to make all the buildings on our campus what's called LEED certified or environmentally friendly. And she cited, I think it was Architectural Digest, which if you're not an architect, you probably don't know what that is. So she just briefly said, according to a whenever article from Architectural Digest, which is the lead monthly publication among professional architects, they said that's it. That's all we need. Now, Google is a great start. You can Google and hit news just like we did here. Oops, let me get that off. So if you remember, we just put in COVID toes and then hit news. We actually didn't hit news, but we could have hit news. And then all we'll get are news sources. So that's easy peasy. Same kind of idea here. Well, let me back up and say that local news, including the Lanthorn, is fine. You'll want to make sure that you're not using a source that's way too biased, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But again, all you'll need is the source name, so a CNN article, a New York Times article, wherever, and the date of publication. That's it. That's what we need. So how do you know if you've got a good news source or not? Here's some things that you might check. This isn't definitive, but it helps. What's the date? Again, make sure it's current. Is the source biased? Is it reliable? We'll come right back to that. Is the author listed? If the author is not listed, that's a red flag. Should go up. Now, AP and Reuters are exceptions to that. They don't usually include the author's name because it's called a wire service. But they're fairly reliable. They're very reliable. So you can still use those. But if you don't see the author clearly listed, second guess it. And if you remember, that's where were we with her? I think we were here, right? Yep. That's why I said hi, Judy, because we know it's Judy. And then we found that it's current with the date. Don't use blogs or editorial opinion work unless it's clearly written by an expert. So you don't want to go and cite a blog in general. You could say that, Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, published earlier this year on the blog called this, saying, and then you give us the information. But you don't want to just be like, according to a geek tech blog, here's the thing. That means nothing. But if you say, according to Bill Gates, who is the founder of Microsoft and published earlier this year on Geek Tech blog, that changes everything, right? So keep that kind of thing in mind. Do be aware of fake news sources like the Onion, which is satire. Wikipedia gives you a list of satire websites. I I know you probably know that, but you know, in Tennessee, I think it was last year, the year before, one of the state legislators, state representatives, was in Nashville in a hearing and cited an Onion article straight, just dead ass. This is real news. It clearly was not. And so he got laughed at. I mean, that's embarrassing. If I were running against him, I would run that nonstop. It's like, do you really want this idiot running your thing? So don't let that trap you. So be careful, be aware. Um, Other fake news. I guess it depends on your feelings on other things. But what I'll say is that different news sources have different degrees of bias, and I want to show you a chart. Let's skip through to here. That sort of breaks it down for you. I know this is a little tough to see. It's gonna move. Oh, that works. Um, what you've got here is the media bias chart. This one's from 2018, but this comes from a group called Media Bias Fact Checkers. And the way they do this is blindly review articles and then rate them. If you'll see over here on the left, from original fact reporting to fabricated information, and then every report between. So it's original, it's the report. Here, it's still facts. Here, it's more of a complex analysis. And then it goes to an analysis. So it's here's a little bit of fact, but here's sort of what we're making of it. Then we get a little lower and you see opinion, but it's still fair in terms of the opinions that are given, generally speaking. Selective or incomplete story. So now things are getting a little blurry in terms of, is this opinion or is this news? Then you get down to the propaganda level down here. Maybe it's misleading, and then it's inaccurate or it's just garbage. Um, then across the top, on the left, most extreme liberal, that moves over to neutral in the center, and then on the right, most conservative sources. So you'll see this sort of gray circle here. If something is touching the gray circle, it's probably okay to use it. Now, if it's barely in there, and you may be surprised, CNN is right here. They put CNN here because, they're fairly mainstream as far as being liberal. They barely skew liberal. However, they have more hours in their broadcasts dedicated to commentary shows than some other networks. So with that, there's a lot of opinion coming in, and daytime's fact, nighttime is opinion. Same thing with Fox News. Let's see where they put them. Oh, here, yeah. So see, they're much lower. Now, people on the right, you might imagine, will say things like, "Well, the fake news chart is fake news in itself." No, it's really not. It just, I mean, it tells you this is not reliable. This is propaganda. CNN, a lot of opinion. But I mean, on the right still, lots of stuff can be used. I mean, you've got the National Review, the Hill, Wall Street Journal, the Economist, the Fiscal Times, what is it, the Weekly Standard. These things are fine, right? On the left, you've got Politico, New York Times, The Guardian, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, Slate, Daily Beast, those sorts of things, Vanity Fair, Vox. So it's there. It's good. But then you get out of that and you see things like MSNBC. Do note that MSNBC is probably not one that you want to use, but NBC is right there. It's front and center. It's one of the best. That's the difference, right? Between NBC, which is like channel 8 or whatever on your TV, and then MSNBC, which is up higher, channel 59 at my house. So, Huffington Post, same kind of thing. BuzzFeed News. Then when you get down here, you see like Occupied Democrats. So if you've got a really liberal friend on Facebook, you've probably seen that. National Enquirer is pretty neutral on who they lie about or to, but they still lie. And then you've got down here at the bottom things like Breitbart, The Blaze, Daily Caller, InfoWars. If you've not seen InfoWars, do yourself a favor and Google that. That's a treat. That guy was kicked off of Twitter and social media basically for being way out there, we'll say. So do take a look at this and see if any of this will help you make a decision about what types of sources you do and do not want to cite. Then the other thing that you'll see in this here is this website, Media Bias Fact Check. Let's look at that one. I'll get it in a second. Here we go. You know what? Actually, let's jump back. I'm going to see here. Media Bias Fact Check is a website that rates factual accuracy and political bias in news media. It tells you basically how it makes its ratings. And you can go to their, again, don't cite Wikipedia for God's sake. But while we're here, let's take a look. Don't cite Wikipedia ever. But you know as well as I do, down here there can be some really good stuff. So let's see what we've got. Columbia Journalism Review. Great. There is a peer-reviewed journal right there with a hyperlink. So, nope, I do not want to do that today. Thank you. And so, bam, you've got a great source here that you found from Wikipedia. Now, to get back here, what you'll want to do, you can do it a few different ways. You can find what's on the left, center left, right in the middle, conspiracy or pseudoscience. There's a list of satire websites. Let's look at conspiracy and pseudoscience and see what pops up. So again, it gives you the 911truth.org. Any of these stand out to anybody? Ancient Origins, I feel like that's Ancient Aliens. Autism Speaks. Is that interesting to some folks, I'm sure. Let's see. Christian Science, which is not Christian Science Monitor, which is a pretty good source. Again, you can look through all these. It's just, I think it's interesting to look for names that jump out at you like, what? That one? Mm-hmm. That's right. It's on there. Illuminati Watcher, that one probably doesn't surprise anybody. A couple different Jesus options. Live Strong. Right? So, be careful with whatever you use. There's PETA. Let's back up here. The easiest way to do this is if you find something out there that you're thinking, I would like to use that. Let's do COVID-19 China weapon. And then we'll click on news. Washington Post, Newsweek, BuzzFeed. South China Morning Post is actually a really good source. Let's look that one up. South China Morning Post. Left center, so it's moderately on the left. Publish factual information. They do use some loaded words sometimes. So again, it's not bad, even though you may have never heard of it before. What was another one here? Politico, The Atlantic. We saw some of these. Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. Sounds rad. Let's see what we get here. Search. Gotta go back real quick. What was that called? Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. Okay. Don't know why it opened in a new one. Okay, yeah, that is legit. Least bias, minimal bias, few loaded words. That one's pretty straight down the middle. It's always nice to find. There was one more that popped. Defense 1. Let's see what that one is. Least biased as well. Good. So again, I've never heard of those last two, but it's good to know that they are least biased and that we could use them. So again, you might just tell us that you looked this up when you cite it. Okay. When all else fails, use what I call the say it out loud test. So if you imagine being in a class or recording yourself and saying, according to billybobsblogspot.com, probably not. All right, next up, statistics. Statistics are as good as where they're published, really. So if it comes from a journal article, it's good. If it comes from one of these news sources that are non-biased, it's good. You don't want to just trust all statistics, though. There's places out there that really focus on this. Gallup, polls, Pew Research, 538, which is ran by a guy named Nate Silver. Those are usually very, very reliable, and they have tons of topics. So just to give you the quick version here, let's go to Gallup. Gallup.com, and let's say we wanted to search for air pollution. I don't know. World's view of air, nearly 4 in 5 satisfied with quality air worldwide. In U.S., water pollution worries. So let's look here. So they've got your little news story, but it's going to always have lots of stats in it right there. So if you wanted to, for example, compare different countries or areas satisfied with local air quality, United States, where do we go? There we go. 84 are satisfied with air and 82 are satisfied with water. But then, for example, overall, we are ahead of the world with satisfaction. Doesn't mean our water's any better. It just means we're satisfied with it. Also, note this is from 2017, so it's 3 years old. This could have changed, especially with new, rollbacks of regulations in America on pollution. So, just be aware of that kind of stuff. All right. Government documents are usually good. Industrial commercial reports, if the report from a company that makes a product, so I'm just looking around here, Apple, my iPhone, I don't know if it shows up, but if it comes from Apple and it says that Apple is wonderful and here are some stats, be sort of skeptical about those because maybe it's trying to push more Apple products. But if it's from Apple and it gives you, for example, the specs, the technical specs, and those include statistics about the product, then that's very reliable. Educational institution data. So if it's like, harvard.edu, two things. One, it doesn't mean it's peer reviewed because it's from like Harvard or Yale or any school. And then the other thing is think about how you're going to get different information from two different .edu sites. So on one, you might be using, let's say you're looking up the Big Bang Theory, not the show, the scientific theory. And you go to Harvard and you're going to find, yep, it's the way things worked and the universe began and dust particles and blah, blah, blah. Let's say then that you go to like Liberty University, which is the biggest Christian school, I think, in the world. It probably won't have the same exact way of explaining things. when it comes to some scientific positions. So be aware that even those will change. But again, with all this, use your primary source. Think about the date, and then there's that motive: who conducted or funded a study. If it's a company who makes water filters, and they're talking about the condition of our water, maybe they want to sell more filters. Not always, but it could happen. Okay, popular or industry sources. These are generally the least reliable. This is sometimes when you get onto blogs. Again, if it's field specific and it's technical specs, that's okay, but be skeptical if it sounds too good to be true. It probably is. There's the academic universities that we sort of just talked about. The other part of that is to let you know that there are different types of institutions. So, for example, Grand Valley is what's called a comprehensive school. We're not liberal arts, although we feel liberal arts. Liberal arts are usually very small. We're comprehensive. Then there are R1 and R2 schools, which are Research 1, Research 2. So, for example, Michigan State, where I went to my PhD, Southern Miss, are R1 schools. So they focus in on research in a variety of fields. R2, they do research. It's part of who they are, but they also have a little liberal arts flair. And then comprehensive it's just that, it's comprehensive. It gives you the full experience of sort of the best of all possible worlds. So you're in a good spot. But, if you are looking at hard scientific data from a liberal arts school, how reliable is that? If you're looking at opinion pieces on, um, you know, campus therapy sessions, maybe an R1 isn't the best thing to go with. So think about the background of your source and how that might play into what you're reading. Government agencies are usually pretty good. They tend to be anyway. So I'll say that. But if you need specific information, disease and illness rates, CDC is good. Crime, FBI. The CIA has a great website. It's called the CIA. I think it's the Fact Book. You can find out lots of stuff about lots of different places in the world. There is also a departments for all of these areas. This is the cabinet positions. So, that might be useful. For example, if you're going to talk about we need to change Michigan's agricultural system to more of a customer service based industry. Well, maybe go to the Department of Agriculture and find out how much land is used for farming in Michigan. Other good sources are expert opinion or testimony. Key thing there is that it's from an expert. This isn't just anyone's opinion or their testimony. There's 3 different ways to be considered an expert, for us at least. One is a terminal degree in a field. So you see them there, the MD, PhD, JD, Master of Fine Arts. JD, by the way, is a Juris Doctorate, so that's an attorney. There's an ED, Education Doctor, Doctor of Education. The number 2 way to do this, to be an expert, is a certification from an accrediting body. So, for example, people who are like master electricians, those folks don't have the option of getting a PhD. There's not one offered, but they still are experts in that field. So they need to be respected as such. And then you've got 20 or more years of professional experience in a very specific field. So, even if you have someone who, I'm just thinking, like yesterday, I'm in my basement. It's in Allendale, so it's not really Grand Rapids, but our exterminator came by the downstairs window. If I don't know how long he's been doing it, but he is not an expert on insects. I mean, they do PhDs in that area, but 20 years experience when it comes to very specifically extermination of insects. Yeah, he's an expert by that point. So, thing to be careful of. If your expert gives you their opinion, make sure that they are an expert pertaining to the topic that they're discussing. So, for example, I'm considered an expert in interpersonal communication. If I were to tell you my opinion on some biological issue or like this COVID-19 thing, it's no more valuable than anyone else's opinion because that's not my area. Now, I could tell you about messaging when it comes to like the press conferences about COVID-19 or the way individuals are responding to and talking about COVID-19. Yeah, sure, that's right up my alley. But if I said, it's multiplying at this rate, no. Well, what they ought to do to cure it is no. I'm not an expert there. You also don't want really lay people cited as experts. You can use that, if it's someone who doesn't meet these qualifications and they give you sort of their experience, don't cite it as a source. I mean, it won't count, but you can still say that this person had this experience and that can give us a real clear example. And that can be very valuable. Again, what to avoid? Anything wiki, anybody can add to that. But again, go to the bottom of Wikipedia. It's good stuff. Blogs, unless written by an expert, non experts, and then out of context works. So, again, things that are not designed to talk to you about a particular topic, but mention it, or experts in some field talking outside their field. So, when you get up to actually present this in your speech, the oral citation should be very, very clear. Can't stress this enough. This is where everybody is losing points. You can use simple words like according to. It's nice and clear. It's a nice signal you're about to cite someone besides yourself. You do need to cite all the sources that you use with the date and the publication name. Again, the author and title are less useful for your audience and me. What I also want to make clear when I say cite all your sources, imagine a paper. If this was a paper that we're looking at here, and I had, up here as a source, Brown 20. Whoops. Wow, that just went all to hell. Brown 2020. Bam. And then here it switched over to Jones 2019. And then this was back to Brown. I need to cite Brown here and then get into it. So, according to an article from this journal in 2020, here's this information. Now, when I switch topics, I need to go back and tell them that I'm switching. When I switch sources, rather, I need to tell the audience. No longer is this coming from Brown, this is coming from Jones. Then I'll switch back to Brown here. Maybe, though, this is from Brown also. And then in which case I don't need to cite it again. It's because it didn't change, right? It's continuing. We are assuming everything's coming. Once you cite a source, that everything following that is coming from that same source, unless you tell us otherwise. So just be aware of small things like that can make a big difference when you are actually giving your speech, because it needs to be as honest as possible, even if you're not meaning to be dishonest. It can be, it feels a little shady. The key thing is that we're able to find each source. So if all I know is that there's an article in 2019 in this journal that talks about this topic, I should be able to put in the journal name, the date, and the topic and find it pretty quickly. And I got nothing going on, so I'll probably just do that anyway. But if it's a unfamiliar source, give us that quick background if you need to. If you have a question like, should I? Yeah, you probably should. Okay, so there are your oral citations. There's the whole spiel on all your sources, where they should come from. You are required to have certain sources. So for the first and the last two speeches, those requirements are different. Check the syllabus for that. I do want to take just a couple minutes more and talk about this one pager just briefly. Then I'll go up and show you what I'm looking for on your assignment sheet that you'll turn in. So, first of all, this is chapter 5, informative versus persuasive speaking. We're going to do both, but they're very separate, and I don't want you to blend them together. That'll be a problem. So, first, informative is just educating people, providing facts. Persuading, as we talked about, is trying to impact or change attitudes, beliefs, values, behaviors, that sort of thing. There are three types. We often blend them, but we're not going to here. If you want clear examples, you can look at some of these, like a pure informative. It's when you go to a drive-through. They don't try to persuade you what to get. They just want to know so they can fill your order. Pure persuasion is like a sales pitch where they do want to tell you what to get. We'll look at some of those later in the semester. Then we got pure entertainment examples, stand-up comedy, that kind of thing. And then lots of blended examples. But again, we want to focus just on being informative, being persuasive. In the persuasive speech, if you need to inform us of a current situation in order to show that it's a problem, that's fine, no worries. But the flip is not okay. So in the informative, if you use words or phrases like, you should do this, you should think that, the best way is the, that sort of stuff. That's an opinion, a suggestion, and we don't need persuasion in the informative. So you can go through there and look at some of these examples. What I want to do, though, is just come back up here and explain what I'm looking for. Let's see if I can move this over just a touch more. Nope, can't do it. Okay, so this is for the topic and source assignment. And this page, the front, if you will, is about the topic, and this is about your sources. Where I've got this filled in is a sample. That's it. So what is my topic? College campuses and oral communication centers, like the speech lab that I run. I want you to answer these questions for us. How will you discuss it informatively and or specific to Grand Valley? So here I'm just going to talk about the numbers of centers, what they do, how they vary. Here's the national organization for them, and I'll note that Grand Valley has one. Nothing persuasive there, just reporting facts. How will you argue your point persuasively later in the semester? I'll argue that they're a good thing, they're valuable. Specific to Grand Valley, I'll recommend that everybody should use these. Why is it relevant to this audience? Well, because we're all students giving oral presentations, and so you need to know all your resources to help you. That's what I'm looking for with that. Just think it through, ask the questions, answer the questions. And if you can't answer one of these, it could be a sign that it's not the best topic to use. I mean, not always, but it could be. As for sources, very similar. I don't need every single detail. I'll put a lot in here for this example, but this is not just for me, but it's also for you to keep up with what you're doing. And by the way, if you want to use this to keep a running tally, just keep adding lines here, right? So you've got that as an option. Now, source type, maybe it'll be a news source coming from CNN in 2020. That's fine. That's all we need. Maybe it is a journal article from the Journal of College Medicine from 2018. Great. So why is it credible? Well, for this one, it's because it was published in a peer-reviewed journal. So that's fine. Let's say it's a something from like Bill Gates, and you say, well, yeah, it's credible because this is a world-renowned computer hardware and software designer. We all know Bill Gates is quite credible, so especially on technology issues. Here's why that matters. How do you plan to use it? I'll talk about ways that communication centers work on campuses with more than just public speaking courses. So I want to persuade people to use it for all classes, not just speech. And also I want to inform on the skills that we teach, we work on, so that people can get a broader appreciation. Quotation or stat that I might be using, if that applies. I might talk about specific numbers of how many there are and how many workshops we can specifically do. So that sort of thing. So that's what we're looking for here. And go and look at that assignment. It's pretty clear, I hope, on the syllabus as far as what I'm looking for. I need 3 sources. One is going to be a peer-reviewed journal. Another is going to be a news source, a good news source. And of course, the third will be a solid statistic that could come from a news source or a peer-reviewed journal, but doesn't have to. But I don't want you to sort of mix and match. So I don't want you to have like, here's this journal article that I found through this news story that included this statistic. So find it your own, each one of those. Right? And again, this should be about your topic. Don't just do it to show me you can find it, but Work smart, not hard. Once you decide on this topic, you've nailed that thing down. Come back in and get get sources that will actually benefit you moving forward. All right, so I hope that was pretty clear. Some differences between persuasion and informative speaking. We'll come back and talk more about that. Reference your chart here if one of your potential sources is on it. If not, go to that media bias fact check website. Hopefully you see what I'm looking for on this. If not, definitely let me know and I'm happy to help. And then we went through some ideas about different sources. And last going in reverse, how to come up with a topic, what you should use as a checklist, and brainstorming that might be helpful. So, again, as always, if you have questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I will talk to you next time.